This week in CIST 1602, we're looking at Chapter 10, Planning Contingencies. So looking at this chapter, in this chapter you're going to learn the components of contingency planning, how to respond to incidents or disasters that may threaten an organization's continued operations. We'll look at incident response plans and disaster recovery plans in depth, as well as business continuity plans. Keep in mind the importance of timing and continued reevaluation of continuity or contingency plans is discussed in this chapter and is important, and also how an organization will manage its investigations. First, we'll look at introduction to contingency planning. All right, so first we'll look at what a contingency planning is. So the broad process of planning for the unexpected, that is called contingency planning. The primary components of this, its major components, are the business impact analysis, incident response planning, disaster recovery planning, and also the business continuity planning. So one thing with this, you're planning for unexpected events. This is typically going to involve general business management, information technology, and InfoSec management. It's important to have a plan in place that addresses how to identify, contain, and resolve an unexpected event. We're also going to look at some components of contingency planning. So the four major components of contingency planning are the business impact analysis, incident response plan, disaster recovery plan, and the business continuity plan. Business impact analysis, what this does is assuming all risk management controls have been bypassed. So essentially assuming that the worst has happened and then estimating the impact. An incident response plan, it's a plan designed to deal with the effects of an unexpected event. The incident response planning, when you're going through this, that involves the preparation for the unexpected event. Think of the incident response as the procedures that commence when an incident occurs. So we have an incident occur, how do we respond to it? That is our incident response. Our disaster recovery plan, that involves the preparations for recovery from a disaster, regardless of the cause of that disaster, whether it is natural disaster or man-made. So when that disaster is detected, the disaster recovery plan will be activated. You will have a disaster recovery response team. This is something that's actually implemented. They are to actually implement the disaster recovery plan in the event of the disaster. Business continuity plan, that ensures that critical business functions can continue if a disaster occurs. This plan is going to be managed by the organization CEO or COO. It's activated and executed at the same time that the disaster recovery plan is executed. So when this is activated when a disaster is a major long-term situation, requires more complex restoration of information and IT resources. The NIST CP methodology. So in this, the contingency planning management team, they begin developing a CP document, and the NIST recommends the following steps. You develop a CP policy statement. So you develop the contingency planning policy statement. You conduct the business impact analysis. You identify preventative controls. Develop recovery strategies. You develop an IT contingency plan. You make sure that you plan testing, training, and exercises, and then plan maintenance. The CMPT, and these are some people that are involved, the teams that perform the planning and execution of a CP plan, and their primary roles. All right, the champion project manager, team manager. These are ones that the contingency planning management teams, they collect information about information systems and the threat they face. The team then conducts the business impact analysis and creates the contingency plans for the incident response, disaster recovery, and business continuity. The incident response team manages and executes the IR plan by detecting, evaluating, and responding to incidents. The disaster recovery team manages and executes the DR plan. Here they detect, evaluate, respond to disasters, and they're reestablishing operations at the primary business site. The business continuity team manages and executes the BC plan by setting up and starting off-site operations in the event of an incident or disaster. Next, we'll look at incident response. Incident response, that's the procedures that commence when an incident occurs. You also have an incident response plan. It's a plan designed to deal with the effects of an unexpected event. And to note that the incident response planning involves the preparations for an unexpected event. The Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, these identifies the following key components of a typical incident response policy. You have a statement of management commitment, the purpose and objective of the policy, the scope of the policy, so it's saying to who and what it applies, under what circumstances, definitions of InfoSec incidents and related terms, organizational structure and definition of roles, responsibilities, and the level of authority. It prioritizes are the severity ratings of the incidents, performance measurements, and the reporting and contact forms. These should all be included in the incident response policy. The incident response plan, so when a threat becomes valid, a valid adverse event is classified as an InfoSec incident. If it is directed against information assets, has a realistic chance of success, and it threatens the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information, resources, and assets. Now, keep in mind that the IR is a reactive measure. It's not a preventive one. Most IR plans include some type of preventive recommendations, though. So, some of the criteria that you can use to determine whether an incident is occurring. So, once again, if the information assets of the target attack, if it has a chance of success, and if the attack threatens the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the information, resources, and assets. So that's when you can tell that you can use that to determine whether an actual incident is occurring. So what action should be taken during the reaction to an incident? You should use incident detection using incident classification. So what is incident classification? That's the process of examining an adverse event that has the potential to escalate into an incident and determine whether it constitutes an actual incident. This is something that when you classify an incident, that's a responsibility of the IR team. Soon as an incident occurs, the right people must be immediately notified in the right order, which will be our notification of key personnel. You would have an alert roster. That's a document that contains contact information of individuals that must be notified in the case of an event. You want to make sure that you document an event or keep a documentation of the incident. This should record the who, what, when, where, why, and how of each action taken while the incident is occurring. You want to put in then the implementation of required containment strategies. The containment strategy should focus on two tasks: stopping the incident or recovering control of the affected systems. So containment strategies include disconnecting affected sources of communication in order to cut off the attack from the outside of the company network. This is something that this strategy can only be used if the designated communication channel is not business critical. You may also dynamically apply filtering rules to limit certain types of network access, which targets the specific vulnerability being exploited by the threat agent. Monitoring the incident while developing a more specific strategy. Now, keep in mind that all these containment strategies focus on stopping the incident and recovering of the system controls. The next action is either escalation of the incident to a disaster or beginning the incident recovery process. So, if an incident increases in the scope or severity to the point that the IRP team can't adequately contain the incident, each organization is going to have to determine during the business impact analysis at what point does the impact become a disaster. They also must document when to involve outside responders, such as law enforcement. When you start with the incident recovery process, first you need to identify the vulnerabilities that allow the incident to occur and spread and resolve them. You want to address the safeguards that fail to stop or limit the incident, or something that maybe was missing from the system in the first place, install, replace, or upgrade them. If present, you want to evaluate the monitoring capabilities of your system, restore the data from backups as needed, restore the services and processes in use, continuously monitor the system, and then restore the confidence of the communities of interest. And that's the process that goes with the incident recovery process. Next, we're going to talk about disaster recovery. All right, a disaster recovery planning. This is the preparation for and recovery from a disaster. And this could be something that could be natural or man-made. So a disaster recovery, what an instance of disaster when the organization is unable to contain or control the impact of the incident. The level of damage or destruction of the incident is so severe the organization, something they're unable to quickly recover from. So the key role in the disaster recovery plan is to define how to reestablish operations at the location where the organization is usually located, or primary site. Now, a disaster recovery plan, it covers the preparations for a disaster and how to recover from it. Some of the natural disasters, and we talk about man-made may be a virus, that goes through the system, theft, espionage, things of those natures. Natural disasters are disasters such as a fire, earthquakes, flood, lightning, tornadoes, along with the other ones listed on your screen here. When you're planning to recover, you want to use a scenario development and impact analysis. They're used to categorize the level of threat to each potential disaster. When you're starting the planning process, are you generating a disaster recovery scenario? Keep in mind that your most important asset is the people. That's the human resource considerations, the employees. That's your most important part of your disaster recovery scenario. It's also a good idea to have cross-training of employees in this situation to ensure quick restoration of an organization. Some key points in a disaster recovery plan is to have clear delegation of roles and responsibilities. People need to know who's in charge of what and what are they responsible for having done. Execution of the alert roster and notification of key personnel, clear establishment of priorities, documentations of the disaster, procedures for that, the action steps to mitigate the impact of the disaster on the operations of the organization, and then alternative implementations of the various system components, if the primary version should be unavailable. It's important to keep emergency contact information on hand for each employee. And also make sure each employee has access to a contact number or hotline for calling the organization during an emergency as well. Okay, business continuity. What is a business continuity plan and why is it important? A business continuity plan ensures that the critical business functions can continue if a disaster occurs. So it's essential for an organization's survival in the event of a disaster. A business continuity plan is usually managed by the organization's CEO or COO. This is something that this plan is activated and executed at the same time a disaster recovery plan. Once again, once the disaster is major or long-term, and so will require a complex restoration of information or IT services. Now, the first step in contingency efforts is the development of the policy, followed by the planning. The NIST approach for contingency planning to make a viable business continuity planning program is form the BC team, develop the BC planning policy statement, review the business impact analysis, identify preventive controls, create relocation strategies, develop the business continuity planning or plan, ensure the plan by testing, training, and exercises, and ensure the plan maintenance as well. So with the business continuity plan, once again, it begins with the development of a BC policy. One of the most important pieces of a BC plan involves the identification of critical business functions. Now, once you've got the plan developed, one of the most there's an important testing of the offsite facility. This is something you want to test regularly. Maybe even look for better alternative offsite locations as you're going through the testing. The reason why a continuity plan should be tested and rehearsed in this is because an untested plan is not a usable plan. So without the testing and rehearsal, the quality of that plan and its ability to accomplish its objectives of shorten the recovery time is unknown. So you want to make sure that one of your key objectives is to remove as many unknown factors as possible. And you do this through your testing, through your exercises. So the testing can also help you see hidden flaws in the plan. That's something that you can then take steps to repair those plans before it's actually needed. Now, there are some continuity strategies we can talk about. Usually, though, the biggest issue in this is the cost. So a couple of these are exclusive use options: hot site, warm site, cold site. Hot site duplicates resources and requires only the latest backup personnel to function. So think of it as it's got all your hardware, your phones, your electricity, your office setup, all of your software is installed. You're just ready to go in, load your backups, and get back to work. Warm site is going to be similar to a hot site. It's going to lack some of the same service and typically doesn't have all the necessary software applications available. Cold site is going to prepare you the bare minimum. So without the computer hardware, maybe just be an empty building. So you got the empty room, you have the heating and cooling, electrical services, those type things. You need to move in your computers, load the software, load in the database and everything. Some three of the shared use options here are the timeshares. These operate in conjunction with a business partner or organization. The advantages is the cost, disadvantages is the total amount of hardware required. Service bureaus provide services for a fee. These are something that's usually going to be under a contractual agreement. And then mutual agreements. They're typically a contract between two organizations, which the organizations agree to assist each other in the event of a disaster. And then you can have also specialized options such as a rolling mobile SOP or externally stored resources that are pre-positioned. Next, we'll discuss crisis management. Crisis management can be described as the action steps that affect people inside and outside of an organization that are taken during and after a disaster. Now, some organization plans for crisis management, they are a completely separate process. Some of these have them set up as part as the disaster recovery plan. The protection of human life should be a high priority. The organization's image is something else the organization will look at as a high priority. So sometimes those cause this to be put into its own committee, policy, and plan. All right, so some roles for a crisis management team will be supporting personnel and their loved ones during a crisis, keeping the public informed about an event and the actions that's been taken, and also communicating with major customers, suppliers, partners, regulatory agencies, industry organizations, the media, and other interested parties. So this is all things that the crisis management team is responsible for and their roles. Now, the crisis management planning team, they should establish a base of operations near the site of the disaster as soon as possible. And they're going to be charged with three primary responsibilities: verifying personnel status, activating the alert roster, and coordinating with emergency services. And this team, the CMPT team, they should include individuals from all functions of the organization, from all different departments, to make sure that the departments can communicate and work together. Now, the resumption of business. So the DR, BC plans, they can also be combined into a single document, and it's going to be known as the Business Resumption Plan, the BRP. Now, this is something that should be separate from the Incident Response Plan. So because those two plans, the DR, BC plans, are going to be so closely related, they can be combined into one. Now, in this case, this plan must be able to support the reestablishment operations at two different locations. So one of them at a alternate site that you can open up immediately, and then one back at the primary site when everything is cleared up with the disaster. You also want to make sure that you test your contingency plans. There are a couple different things we can look at to test our plans. So once again, keep in mind that very few plans are going to be executed as they were initially written. So once you test the plan, you're going to find new vulnerabilities, new faults, new issues with the plan, and so you'll have to go back through and update the plan and work out the kinks in your plan. A couple ways we do this is a desk check. That's reviewing the plan and creating a list of correct and incorrect components. A structured walkthrough. That involves walking through the steps taken during an actual incident or disaster. So in this one, everybody's going to discuss their actions around a conference table and discuss the responsibilities as the incident unfolds. You can also have a simulation. This is where the team is presented with a scenario of an actual incident or disaster, and they're expected to recreate it they're expected to react as if it had occurred. Now, this usually involves performing the communications that should occur, but it really stops short of actually performing the actual task that will be required in the event that this was a live incident. Full interruption testing. In this, individuals follow each and every incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity plan. It includes the interruption of the services, restoration of data from backups, notification of appropriate individuals. This test is something that's normally going to be performed after normal business hours, so that you do not really disrupt the business function or even simulate the disruption of business functions.